Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my Endless Diary Tales channel? Thank you so much. In my previous life, my older sister married into a wealthy family, while I married a poor boy. 1 year after our weddings, her husband's rich family went bankrupt, and my husband became the wealthiest man in the country. She returned to our parents' house, throwing a fit and demanding a divorce. But on her way out, she got into a car accident. When I opened my eyes again, we were both back to the period right before our engagements. Bookmark. Go back. Our parents laid out two completely different choices in front of me and my sister Jessica. One was to marry Ethan Grant and become the future daughter-in-law of the Grant family, living a life of endless wealth and luxury. The other was to marry Mason James, whose grandfather had helped our father many years ago. However, Mason's family was far less prestigious. I lowered my gaze and said nothing. Dad claimed he was letting us choose freely, but in truth I could only take whoever Jessica didn't want. Dad, I want to marry Mason James, Jessica said firmly in the living room. I looked at her in disbelief because in our past life, she had chosen Ethan without hesitation. Our parents reacted far more dramatically, especially Mom, who rushed over to Jessica and asked anxiously, "Jess, what nonsense are you talking about? Mason's just a poor guy if it weren't for his grandfather helping your dad back then." She paused mid-sentence and instinctively shot a glance at Dad. He looked uncomfortable and pressed his lips tightly together. Our family, the Carters, was considered an influential and prestigious name in the city now. So, Dad cared a great deal about his standing in high society. Everyone knew his success had only been possible because of the James family's support in the early days. To repay that kindness, he had casually promised that one of his future daughters would marry into the James family. Now that the Jameses had fallen on hard times, if Dad went back on that promise, he'd lose face and be seen as ungrateful. As for the Grant family, it was currently led by Ethan's grandmother, a woman who placed great importance on family ties. She had somehow gotten her hands on the birth charts of both Jessica and me, and found that we were both destined to bring great fortune to our husbands. She reached out to Dad, hoping that our family would offer one of us to be her grandson's wife. Jessica had been the apple of our parents' eye for the past 20 years, so naturally, they wanted her to marry into the Grant family and enjoy a life of luxury. "Mom, Ethan's health has always been bad," Jessica pouted, tugging at Mom's sleeve. "If I marry Mason, at least we won't have to worry about medical bills. Just let me marry Ethan instead." Mom couldn't resist her constant pleading and eventually agreed to let her marry into the James family. I watched Jessica coldly, realizing how strange her decision was in this life. It became clear to me that she too had been reborn. In our previous life, Jessica had chosen to marry into the Grant family without a second thought. But it wasn't until after the wedding that she discovered Ethan was a full 10 years older than her. She'd always preferred sweet, puppy-like younger guys. Ethan, by contrast, was cold and reserved. They never even consummated the marriage. Not long after, Ethan's grandmother made several poor business decisions, which caused the story group's cash flow to collapse. Ethan had worked hard to secure a major deal, hoping to turn the company around, but it turned out to be a trap carefully planned by his supposed partners. The story group was quickly pushed to the brink of bankruptcy. Jessica had always lived lavishly and had never experienced financial hardship. She couldn't handle the sudden reversal in fortune. Meanwhile, after I married Mason James, his career began to soar. Step by step, he climbed the ranks and eventually even pushed the struggling Grant family out of S's business world. He became the most sought-after rising star among the city's elite. I gave birth to his child and held a position of unshakable status within the James family. High society wives admired and fawned over me, and even my father began going out of his way to curry favor with me. Jessica's mental state started to crumble. She had never had any genuine affection for Ethan, and eventually, she ran back to our parents' house, throwing a tantrum and demanding a divorce. When Ethan's grandmother found out that the family was facing collapse and that her granddaughter-in-law wanted to abandon ship, she was so furious she fainted. The whole incident became the talk of S-City's upper class, a scandal that people laughed about behind closed doors. My father had always been an extremely selfish and status-obsessed man. Back then, he had no problem marrying off one of his daughters to a total stranger just to save face. There was no way he would allow Jessica to leave the Grant family. Now he even hired 2 bodyguards to drag her back. Tragically, the car crashed on the way. Jessica died on the spot. As for me, I also met with an accident that day, and it was the moment I completely lost consciousness. I never imagined that when I opened my eyes again, both of us would be right back at the starting point. I instinctively tightened my grip on the armrest of the wheelchair beneath my palm. In this life, trading fates with Jessica wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I sat in my wheelchair a little dazed, gazing up at the sky. I didn't expect Jessica's face to suddenly appear above me, her lips curled in a smile tinged with blood. "Luna, you're about to marry into a rich family now," she said, still smiling. "Are you excited?" I looked at her coldly, just about to say something, when a familiar tightness rose in my throat. Out of habit, I picked up a tissue and covered my mouth, coughing violently. It took quite a while before I was able to suppress the waves of nausea. When I finally pulled the tissue away and looked down at it, it was stained a glaring vivid red. Jessica stared straight at the crumpled tissue in my hand. Her eyes blinked, her lips moved as if to speak. But in the end, she just turned around and walked away without a word. I watched her retreat, her steps awkward and flustered. A shadow passed over my face. She and I had once been close, more than close, like inseparable sisters. From birth, I had been diagnosed with a congenital weakness. Even growing up was a struggle. Just walking a few steps would leave me breathless. So I was confined to a wheelchair. I couldn't go to school like normal kids. Instead, my family hired private tutors to teach me at home. I had no classmates, no friends, and naturally, my personality became quiet and withdrawn. Jessica, on the other hand, had always been lively and cheerful. My mom adored her bright, pleasing nature. In contrast, she could barely hide her dislike for me. She would often tell my dad and Jessica, "Luna is so gloomy, never smiles, and doesn't have a sweet mouth. Children are sensitive." Jessica quickly picked up on the vast difference in how we were treated. She instinctively tried to please our parents more, winning herself prettier dresses and dolls in return. And just like that, the distance between us grew. Spoiled and favored as she was, her first reaction upon returning to this life was to seize all the luck I had earned in the last one. But what she didn't know was marrying into the James family wasn't really some stroke of fortune. True, the James family would one day rise with incredible speed and dominate the business scene. But at present, they were nothing more than a lonely pair. A widowed woman and her son. After Mason's grandfather passed away, the James and Carter families practically lost all contact. So before I married Mason, I had no idea that the widow in question was actually his stepmother. She had married into the James family when she was just 18. At the time, Mason was only 8 years old. 7 years later, Mason's father died unexpectedly. His stepmother was just 25 then, young and beautiful. But instead of running off with the family's money, she stayed behind and raised Mason all on her own. Mason is 25 this year, and his stepmother is only 35. When I first met her in my past life, I simply assumed she aged well. I never imagined she was truly that young. On the night of our wedding, she kept coming into our room under various excuses. When I finally decided to get up and lock the door, Mason stopped me. "She and I have been together for over 20 years, he said. "Now that I'm married, she's struggling with the change. It's normal for her to feel a little emotional. Luna, please be patient with her." She came and went from our room constantly. And since Mason claimed my health was poor, we never consummated the marriage. He simply coaxed me to go to bed early. But I had trouble sleeping in a new place, so I didn't rest well that night. Half asleep, half awake, I realized at some point Mason had quietly left the room. Even though I couldn't walk far, I could still manage a few more steps than usual. So I got out of bed and followed. That same night, I stood silently outside a door and saw Mason holding his stepmother in his arms as she whispered, "If it weren't for your need to get startup capital from the Carters, we wouldn't have to do this." At the time, I honestly thought their relationship, for all its questionable boundaries, seemed more genuine than my mother's favoritism or my father's selfishness. Compared to that, there was something enviable in how close they were. Because of my weak body, I assumed pregnancy would be difficult for me. So I hadn't taken any precautions. Who would have thought? After just 2 times, I became pregnant with Mason's child. I remember the first time I heard his stepmother quietly scolding him, saying I was already 2 months along. At that point, the two of them were holed up in their room every day, whispering in low voices. Every time I passed by, they would abruptly fall silent. And for the entirety of my pregnancy, Mason's stepmother didn't take care of me for even a single day. Not even during the most critical part of my pregnancy, the final trimester. She simply fled back to her family's home. My mother ignored me completely, and my father thought that the $5 million he gave Mason as startup capital when I got married was more than enough to repay the kindness the James family had once shown him. So, I went into the delivery room alone, but I suffered a difficult labor and massive blood loss. I clearly heard Mason begging the doctors outside to save the baby. But fate was cruel. The child was born still. The doctors said my body had been too weak, so frail that the baby hadn't been able to absorb much nutrition from the womb. While I was still drowning in grief, Mason's stepmother reappeared after months of being gone, cradling a newborn baby in her arms. "Luna," she said, "I know how devastated you must be right now. So, I brought back a baby from my hometown for you to raise." How could she possibly believe that I, who had just lost my own child, would be willing to raise a stranger's baby? But Mason didn't care about my feelings at all. He happily went off to get the child's birth certificate. That was also the first time I ever saw Mason's household registration book. It plainly showed that he and his stepmother were only 10 years apart in age. It was then that Mason, with the help of the $5 million my father had given him, combined with his own sharp instincts and fearless ambition, turned his company into a dark horse in the city's business world. The James family quickly rose to fame and prominence. To protect the family's new reputation, Mason and his stepmother didn't want the truth of my stillbirth to become public gossip. I still remember Mason gently holding my hand and whispering, "This child will be ours from now on. Everything's been arranged. No one will ever know what really happened at the hospital." He paused, glancing at my pale face and the pain still etched in my expression. "Luna, you scared me so badly during delivery. The hospital issued several critical condition notices. Please promise me we won't have any more children. Your health is the most important thing." At the time, I was so consumed by the grief of losing my baby that I didn't even notice the strange look on Mason's face. To the outside world, including Jessica, it looked like I had everything a woman could dream of. A loving mother-in-law, an adoring husband, and a beautiful child of my own. After coming back to life this time, maybe the depression from losing that child still haunted me. I could feel my health worsening, even more fragile than before. If I married into the Grant family like this, they'd probably think I was bad luck. I let out a sigh without thinking. "Don't sigh." Jessica, now suddenly back and full of energy, waved a hand and tossed a bank card onto my lap. I stared at it in stunned silence for a long while before slowly reaching out to pick it up. "What's this?" I asked quietly. "My dowry," she said. "There's $2 million on it from Mom." Jessica shrugged like it was no big deal. Seeing that I still looked confused, she gave me a bright, almost radiant smile. "Luna, don't think marrying into the Grant family means a life of luxury. They're about to go bankrupt. Hide this money well. You'll need it later for medical expenses." She paused, then suddenly squatted down in front of me, locking her eyes onto mine. "Mason is going to be the richest man in S-City someday. I'm about to become a wealthy society wife. If you ever need money, just come find me. I won't be heartless like you were. I'll actually help you." Seeing the bitterness and frustration in her expression, I suddenly realized that at the moment she died in that car crash in our past life, she must have been furious with me. She must have believed that I, as the wife of the richest man in S-City, did nothing to help her when the Grant family collapsed. Even if our relationship had grown distant over time, we were still blood sisters. But what she never knew was I had no real status in the James family. And on the very day she died, I died too. A sudden wave of sorrow welled up in my chest. Before my mind could catch up, my mouth had already spoken the words. "Jess, you need to be careful with Mason and his mother." "What are you talking about, Luna?" She frowned slightly, her beautiful brows drawing together. She must have thought I was just jealous that she'd get to marry into the James family this time. I didn't hesitate any longer. I told her everything, the truth about Mason and his stepmother, and the fact that I had died in our past life. I told her every last detail. Jessica went silent for a long time. Then, to my surprise, she suddenly stood and pulled me into a tight hug. "They dared to bully you," she growled. "Watch how I deal with them this time." My nose stung and I nearly burst into tears. That hug, belonging to us as sisters, had come nearly a lifetime too late. And the real tragedy between my sister and me was that even knowing we were headed straight into a whirlpool of fate, we had no choice but to walk into it anyway. After Jessica and I successfully held our weddings, the next day was our official return visit to our family home. Just like Jessica had said, Ethan was quiet and emotionally distant, while Jessica was far too lively and impulsive. In their previous life, the two had found each other increasingly unbearable. That's why even after marrying me, Ethan's demeanor remained unchanged. Because of my mental state, I had refused to share a bed with him on our wedding night. He didn't seem to mind. In fact, he got up early the next morning just to accompany me back home. To my surprise, Mason came along with Jessica. In our previous life, his stepmother had found every excuse possible to keep him from returning with me. This time, though, he was here. "Do you want to talk to your sister?" A deep, steady voice came from above me. I turned my head, startled. It was Ethan. Our eyes met for about 2 seconds before I instinctively nodded and looked away. Without saying a word, he pushed my wheelchair over to Jessica, then made up an excuse and left with Mason. "Luna, I tortured that wicked hag last night," Jessica said playfully, squatting down in front of me. Because I had warned her in advance, Jessica had expected Mason's stepmother to barge into their bedroom repeatedly. So she boldly put on some inappropriate videos at full volume in the room. Even someone as shameless as that woman couldn't handle the explicit sounds blaring from Jessica's phone. That night, Jessica clung tightly to Mason and refused to give him any chance to sneak off to his stepmother's room for comfort. "You didn't hear her dramatic sobbing last night, crying like someone had died. I don't even know who she was performing for," Jessica said, rolling her eyes. This morning, the woman faked being ill, claiming her joints ached and refusing to let Mason accompany Jessica home. Jessica, without missing a beat, called 911 right in front of her. "Mason and I aren't doctors," she told her coldly. "If you're sick, then go to the hospital." Mason clearly couldn't deal with the scene, so to keep the peace, he agreed to come back to the Carter house with her. Listening to Jessica recount her battle of wits with Mason's stepmother, I felt a gnawing sense of unease. "Mason's exactly your type, the charming, cunning kind," I warned her. "You really can't fall for him." "Oh please. I've had at least 8 or 10 guys like him," she said with a wave of her hand. "Luna, don't worry. Once he becomes the richest man in the city, I'll divorce him, take half his fortune, and use it to cure you." Jessica had already begun fantasizing about a blissful future, but I still couldn't rest easy. Mason and his stepmother weren't people who could be easily dealt with. If someday Jessica and I repeated the same tragedies from our past lives, there wouldn't be anyone to fight for us. So, after our visit home, I invited Ethan to sit down with me for a long conversation. "You want me to convince Grandma not to invest in crypto?" Ethan asked, frowning instinctively. In our past life, the story group had fallen into a financial crisis because of a series of poor investment decisions made by his grandmother. I nodded slightly and told him that a new policy was about to be introduced that would prohibit Chinese nationals from investing in cryptocurrency. If his grandmother kept stockpiling it, she'd be forced to sell at rock-bottom prices. That would devastate the company's stock. "How do you know that policy is coming?" Ethan stared at me, his eyes filled with suspicion. "Crypto's driven the whole country into a frenzy," I said, meeting his gaze. "Trust me, the top-level authorities will intervene soon." After thinking it over for a whole night, Ethan finally brought me to meet his grandmother. "Grandma, your instincts are incredible," he said with an uncharacteristic smile. "The wife I married is definitely a blessing to our family." I had always thought of Ethan as someone quiet and blunt. I didn't expect him to be capable of flattery. That day I saw a whole new side of him. For Ethan's grandmother, investing in crypto had just been a trendy thing to do. She didn't hesitate too long before agreeing to Ethan's proposal to pull all funds from those investments. Only then did I feel my heart finally settle. I was using the knowledge of my past life to stabilize the story group, so I could one day stand firm against Mason James. the future richest man in S City. That way, if Jessica ever wanted to leave her marriage with nothing, I'd have the strength to take her back myself. Some time passed, and just as Ethan had almost forgotten about the conversation, the government indeed issued the policy. All citizens were now banned from trading cryptocurrency. The people who had stockpiled it, waiting for a big payout, all found themselves driven to despair overnight. "Luna, thank you," Ethan said, giving me a rare and sincere smile. "If it weren't for you, Grandma might have suffered a huge blow today." I smiled softly and shook my head. What reassured me the most was that so far everything was still unfolding in the same order as it had in my past life. Ethan suddenly stared at the corners of my lips, seemingly dazed. "This is the first time I've seen you smile," he said. "It's also the first time I've seen you smile," I thought to myself. "Just not a very good-looking one." Our eyes locked for a moment, both of us unintentionally smiling again. The air between us turned subtly intimate. He slowly leaned down, moving closer to my lips. Just then my phone rang sharply, breaking the silence. It was a call from Jessica. Seeing the answer without hesitation, Ethan looked slightly flustered and quietly stepped out of the room. "Bad news," Jessica said as soon as I picked up.
I'm pregnant.
"What?" I froze, stunned. "It's from that night. You know, when I dragged you to the bar for no reason. I didn't think we'd both get so drunk." Her voice over the phone was hesitant, stammering. As I listened, flashes of memory came flooding back. My first time with Mason in our past life had also happened after he got drunk. But isn't it said that men who are truly drunk don't function? A chill ran through me, but all I could do was gently comfort her. "Your body's much healthier than mine. The baby will be just fine. But I don't really want it. I'm still just a kid myself," she admitted reluctantly. Her hesitation cast a shadow over my heart. In my past life, I had longed for that child with every part of me. Yet, he hadn't even opened his eyes to this world before he was gone. I didn't force my own grief onto Jessica. I simply told her that whatever choice she made, I'd support her without hesitation. She said she would think about it seriously, and then we ended the call. As I sat there, lost in thought about Jessica's unexpected situation, Ethan came back into the room carrying an empty suitcase. "What's going on?" I asked, curious. "Last-minute trip abroad. I need to meet with a foreign government to discuss a project," he replied, not even looking up as he began stuffing shirts and suit pants into the suitcase. I thought about how we'd been married for months now, and I hadn't once fulfilled any responsibilities as a wife. Without saying a word, I got out of my wheelchair, squatted down next to him, and gently pressed my hand over his. "Let me help you pack." Ethan looked at me completely stunned. "You can walk," he blurted out. I couldn't help but laugh. "So all this time you thought I couldn't move at all?"
I'm sorry.
"I didn't mean it like that," he said earnestly. His apology was sincere, but it made me pause. A doubt suddenly rose in my chest. "You don't even know me. If Grandma likes someone's birth chart, would you marry them no matter who they were?" Ethan was silent for a whole minute. I almost thought he wasn't going to answer, but then he said slowly, "Yes. Grandma raised me on her own and carried the entire story group on her back. If it made her happy, I would do it. But unless something unexpected happened, I'd probably just spend the rest of my life with that person out of respect, not love." Thinking back to how he married Jessica in our previous life and how they never shared a bed or a life together, I nodded in understanding. Ethan hesitated for a second, then added, "But now something unexpected has happened." My heart pounded at his almost bare confession. Right before he left, Ethan pressed me against the door. Our breaths tangled in the narrow space between us. I could hear his deep, uneven breathing. "Luna, wait for me, okay?" he whispered into my ear. Later, as I lay in bed, I tried to recall all the bitterness from my past life to drive the heat of that moment out of my mind. Jessica's pregnancy timeline matched mine exactly from before, which made me wonder, was Mason doing this on purpose? And Ethan, in my past life, I honestly hadn't paid him much attention. That's why I couldn't quite recall what the second major mistake his grandmother made had been. I only vaguely remembered that it had something to do with Narivia. Thinking about how Ethan had just said he was flying abroad, I quickly called him. "Luna, I just got to the airport. You miss me already?" Ethan teased softly. His voice was smooth, warm, seductive, and somehow made my heart skip. I didn't answer his question. Who arranged this trip? And which country are you going to? I asked urgently. He sounded puzzled but answered patiently. Grandma did. She said she's already coordinated everything with the Nerivian government. My chest tightened the moment I heard that. Without waiting to explain, I shouted at Ethan, ordering him to come home immediately. Go home. You're telling me to go home? He repeated the words a few times, confused. Then suddenly, his tone turned firm and absolute. Luna, I'm coming home. Not long after, I heard the familiar sound of Ethan's business car pulling into the driveway and the engine shutting off. I rushed downstairs on shaky legs. The moment I saw him, I couldn't hold back anymore. NVIA has been tricking executives from major domestic companies under the guise of investment opportunities. Once they get the funds, they break the contracts unilaterally. Don't fall for it, I blurted out, but Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he pressed his head into the curve of my neck and nuzzled against me again and again. Luna, he whispered, I'm just happy you told me to come home. This man in front of me, barely in his 30s, made me wonder if the Ethan Jessica married in the previous life was even the same person. He wasn't cold or silent like she had described. Seeing my serious expression, Ethan finally stopped acting coy. So, Madam Luna, he asked, his tone teasing, how did you know all this again? I couldn't bring myself to explain the unbelievable truth of my past life. Nor did I want to relive the pain of childbirth and loss. The dull sorrow on my face must have been far too obvious because Ethan didn't push me further. Instead, he wrapped his arms around me and promised softly, whatever your instincts tell you, I'll believe them. The next morning, Ethan took me back to the Story family estate to explain to his grandmother why he had suddenly canceled the trip. He took full responsibility for the decision, bringing up countless news reports and examples to show her how Nerivia had long since lost credibility in the global market. After hearing everything, Grandma let out a deep sigh and looked up at the ceiling. I have to admit, she said slowly, I'm getting old. I can't see things clearly anymore. Not long after that, news broke that Nivea had unilaterally broken its contract with the Mickey Group, triggering a huge scandal at home. Realizing she'd made too many critical mistakes, Grandma stepped down and officially appointed Ethan as the new chairman of Story Group. She told him frankly that it was time he took full responsibility for the family business. I can't even imagine what I'd say to your grandfather if Story collapsed in my hands. Now that Story Group had avoided the two major crises from our previous life, I finally felt like I could breathe again. It was only then that I realized it had been a while since I'd heard from Jessica. I asked Ethan to drive me over to the James house. Seeing my sister's now round belly and peaceful smile, my heart ached with a protective tenderness. I thought you didn't want to keep it, I couldn't help but say. She smiled faintly. I hesitated for a while, but once I made up my mind and felt the baby kick, I just couldn't let go. Jessica looked exhausted. I quickly stepped forward to help her onto the couch. And Mason and his dear stepmother? I asked. Just like you said, after she found out I was pregnant, she ran back to her family home. And as for Mason, now that he's a rising star in S-City, I don't even know which banquet or event he's off charming people at. She gently stroked her swollen belly as she spoke, her voice calm. My lively and energetic sister is now grounded and weighed down by pregnancy. She had clipped wings. But at least things weren't like they had been in our previous life. This time our parents regularly sent her money, terrified she might be unhappy. And to her credit, Jessica had managed to gain full control of Mason's company finances. That old witch keeps trying to get money out of me, she said with a cold smirk. But I shut her down every time. Seeing her so much stronger than the fearful, helpless version of her I once knew, I finally felt at ease. Now it was time to help Ethan face the final challenge. Jess, do you remember how Ethan ended up bankrupt last time? She wrinkled her nose in distaste. How would I know? He barely said 2 words to me. I ignored him the entire time we were married. She paused and added, I was never home. By the time I realized something was wrong, Story Group was already beyond saving. I think it had something to do with a research project. One of his business partners stabbed him in the back. Her words sent me deep into thought. She noticed and nudged my shoulder with hers, grinning. What's this? trying to be his guardian angel this time around. Before long, Jessica's due date arrived. Though her body was stronger than mine, she still suffered a difficult labor with heavy bleeding. I waited outside the operating room with our parents, pacing nervously in circles. Mason, just like in the last life, was in utter panic. He sobbed and begged the doctors to save the baby. But watching him, I couldn't shake a strange, unsettling feeling. Thankfully, Jessica made it through safely and gave birth. But none of us got the chance to see the baby. The baby was immediately transferred to the NICU. He's in critical condition. He'll need to stay in an incubator for at least a month, the doctor said sternly. A chilling sense of foreboding crept through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that once the baby was out of our sight, he might not survive. So I asked Ethan to assign someone to guard the neonatal unit around the clock, making sure to monitor the baby's condition at all times. Meanwhile, Ethan had been deep in negotiations with a major research institute. It was a crucial phase of the project and he was rarely home. I decided to stay in Jessica's hospital room, setting up a cot beside her to look after her closely.
Luna.
Jessica's weak voice called out from behind me. I rushed over, scanning her face anxiously. Do you need something? She stared at me for a long moment, then asked softly, Am I being selfish? Before I could respond, she lifted a hand, motioning for me to let her finish. I had such a hard time last time when I opened my eyes in this life. All I wanted was to trade places with you. But this time I really do want to protect you, Luna. Ethan's project is going to be betrayed by the person he trusts the most. That guy was already bought off by Mason. I've known all along. She looked away, ashamed. But I didn't like Ethan, that old man. I married Mason, so of course I hoped he'd succeed. I'm sorry. I should have told you the truth sooner. Tears streamed down my face as I wrapped my arms around her. You died so unfairly in the last life, Jess. I understand why you did it, but this time we'll both live well. We have to. She gently pushed me back. Tell Ethan. Warn him about the betrayal. I tried calling Ethan again and again, but none of the calls went through. Seeing my frustration, Jessica teased. Why are you so hung up on that boring old man? Then she smiled more sincerely. Still, he treats you really well. I've noticed you don't even use your wheelchair much anymore. Go on, take a cab. I'll be fine here, she added. I hesitated, but eventually she persuaded me. I rushed out of the hospital. If I'd known that stepping away for even just a little while would plunge Jessica into such deep despair, I never would have gone. When I arrived at Ethan's office, he was just about to sign a cooperation agreement. Have someone check the contract again? I said, barging through the doors. There's a nearly invisible clause. It's a trap. If you sign it, Story Group will be in danger. Ethan remained calm and told me he'd already discovered that Mason had bribed one of his employees. You rushed over like this? Were you worried about me? He asked, his eyes shining with warmth. Then he gave a self-deprecating laugh. After you've spotted so many of Grandma's decision mistakes, how could I not be extra cautious? Only then did I let out a breath of relief. Just as I turned to leave and head back to the hospital, Ethan grabbed my hand and pulled me into the conference room. This is my wife, he told the team. She's the one who helped us avoid multiple crises. Next time you see her, make sure you call her Mrs. Grant. The room erupted in applause. Someone even joked about handing out red envelopes in the company group chat. I stood frozen in place, my ears burning red. This marriage, which had once been something I thought I could use as a stepping stone, was now being completely reshaped by Ethan's quiet devotion. Luna, he whispered near my ear. I'll protect you and your sister. Don't ever think about leaving me again. Just as I felt myself spiraling from his words, I got a sudden call from the bodyguard Ethan had left at the hospital. Mrs. Grant, I'm so sorry, he said anxiously. I only stepped away to use the restroom. When I got back, the hospital said the baby had died. It felt like a storm cloud had collapsed over me. Ethan saw the color drain from my face, and the moment he realized something had gone wrong, he rushed me back to the hospital. As we reached the hallway outside Jessica's room, we heard her screams through the door. Give me back my son. Give him back to me. A cold voice replied flatly, Ma'am, we did everything we could. It all felt like a sick joke. Had we gone through all this, switched lives, fought fate, only to repeat the same tragedy again? I had helped Ethan avoid every single pitfall from the past life. Why couldn't I do the same for Jessica? Just then, Mason and his stepmother finally arrived. She was holding a portable bassinet in her hand. Seeing me staring directly at it, she forced an awkward smile. "Luna, you're here too." I heard about Jessica's situation, so I rushed back from the countryside. "She's just a baby no one wanted from my village," Mason's stepmother explained, cradling the infant in her arms. "I thought giving her to Jessica might ease her pain a little, so I brought her along." My eyes narrowed involuntarily. Jessica and I didn't lose our children on the same day, so how could she have managed to show up today with a baby already in tow? Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. My mind couldn't help but turn to darker suspicions. Mason repeated the same excuse to Jessica word for word. She erupted, screaming at the top of her lungs from inside the hospital room. "Get out, all of you. Get the hell out." She turned to Ethan, shouting hoarsely, "If you ever want things to be good between you and Luna again, then help me kill them all." I quickly pushed through the crowd gathered at the doorway. Ethan's bodyguards, understanding the situation immediately, escorted Mason and his stepmother out of the room without another word. Sobbing uncontrollably in my arms, Jessica cried, "Luna, only now do I finally understand how desperate you must have felt back then." From the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker of thought cross Ethan's face as he heard her words, but I didn't have the mental space to interpret it. Not now. Jessica's baby had been placed in an incubator the moment he was born. For over 2 weeks, we heard nothing aside from nurses stopping by to collect breast milk. There had been no updates, no visits. Now, the hospital suddenly presented Jessica with a baby and expected her to accept it as her own. But looking into that tiny face, she couldn't even be sure it was her child. After hesitating for a moment, I gently suggested, "Should we maybe run a DNA test first?" Unfortunately, Mason overheard me. Furious, he exploded, "That's my son with Jessica. Whether he lives or dies, you want to stick needles in him now. What kind of person are you?" Ethan frowned instinctively, stepping forward to speak, but Jessica cut him off coldly. "I want the test." Mason froze, clearly stunned she'd say such a thing. Gritting his teeth, he said if the test had to happen, then only he, as the father, would arrange it. The results came quickly. The infant who had died in the incubator was indeed Mason's biological child. But something didn't sit right with me. Why wasn't the test run using Jessica's DNA too? I asked, staring down at the paperwork in my hand. "She's in so much pain. Don't you think she deserves the full truth?" To my surprise, the first person to scold me wasn't Mason. It was my mother. "What kind of person says something like that at a time like this?" she snapped, glaring at me with obvious disgust. "You're just trying to torment her while she's grieving." Her expression made my heart sink. "Mom, I didn't mean." "Then what did you mean?" she demanded, her voice sharp and pressing. "Luna is your daughter too," Jessica interrupted, trying to calm her. "She's just worried. Don't talk to her like that." But my mother wouldn't stop. "I just hate the way she walks around like the whole world owes her something. That face like she's been wronged by the universe." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I softly urged Jessica to rest and quietly left the room. Then came the final blow. Behind Jessica's back, Mason had ordered the immediate cremation of the child without her knowledge or consent. When she found out, she nearly fainted from grief. At that point, my suspicions crystallized into conviction. I asked Ethan to assign someone to monitor Mason and his stepmother day and night. Before long, we got what we needed. A photo of her in a bedroom nursing the baby she had claimed to bring from the countryside. Why was she breastfeeding? If she could lactate, it likely meant she had just given birth. So then whose child was in her arms? Was it possible this baby was actually her own? As I stared at the photo, chills ran down my spine. If this was really happening, had I been tricked the same way in my past life? Ethan immediately ordered a DNA test on Mason's stepmother and the infant. The results confirmed it. The baby she brought back was biologically hers and Mason's. So where was Jessica's baby? Could he still be alive? Ethan reached out to a friend of his at the police department and laid out every detail. The truth came to light fast. Security footage from the hospital revealed several suspicious actions. Just after Ethan's bodyguard stepped away to use the restroom, A person in a white coat was seen entering the neonatal unit carrying a baby. Moments later, they left the unit with another baby in their arms. Surveillance outside the hospital caught that same person getting into a van. The van was later tracked to a remote, dilapidated village. Inside that village, Jessica's real son was found alive. With both evidence and testimony in hand, Mason and his stepmother were taken into custody. It didn't take long for her to confess everything. They'd known their relationship could never be accepted. From the start, they had planned to cover it up. No matter who married Mason, his child would always be switched at birth with the one he had with his stepmother. Mason had said that once the switch was done, the other baby should be killed. But she hadn't had the heart to do it. She thought maybe she'd just abandon the baby. Mason's stepmother had confessed. If he survived, he survived. That would be his fate. And maybe it counted as a form of remembrance for the child I lost. A bitter smile crept across my lips. They had actually named the child Kid, as if they had any right to call him that. What was even more disgusting was that the two of them had already made plans. The baby would be registered under Mason and Jessica's names. After some time had passed, Mason would find a way to quietly get rid of Jessica without leaving a trace so the three of them could finally live together openly as a family. So that's what happened. That's how I had died in my previous life. It had been them all along. With that realization, I felt as though the dark cloud that had loomed over me for so long had finally lifted. "Luna, thank you," Jessica whispered, holding her baby tightly as tears of relief streamed down her face. "If you and Ethan hadn't pushed so hard, I would have just blamed myself and never known the truth, not even in death." Our mother stood beside her, stealing cautious glances at me. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away, avoiding my gaze in shame. "What will you do next?" I asked Jessica gently, concerned for her future. She gave a carefree smile. "When you got married, I gave you $2 million as a wedding gift. Now it's your turn to return the favor." I chuckled, shaking my head. $2 million? Try 200 million. Story Group had long since solidified its position as the most powerful conglomerate in S-City. 200 million was hardly worth blinking at. Mason and his stepmother were convicted on multiple criminal charges. With a bit of help from Ethan behind the scenes, the punishment was severe. They'd be spending the rest of their lives behind bars. Jessica refused to come back and live with Ethan and me, worried she might interfere with our relationship. So, our parents took her and the baby back to the Carter household. She was completely done with her bad boy phase. That little wolf cub had left her scarred for life. She swore she'd never marry again. As for me, 2 years later, I safely gave birth to my first child with Ethan. Looking back now, I knew the original arrangement between us, the marriage born from a mutual agreement, was long gone. What had begun as a contract had turned into the true beginning of our life together.